Hello everyone. Hello all. Welcome to the Labs 2022 Call for Ideas webinar. We're very excited to have such a large and truly global turnout of over 100 registered attendees from 41 countries. And we are really honored to have you all here today. Before we start, a few reminders. This webinar is being live streamed on YouTube and will be available on demand as soon as it's over. We'll share the link and the slides we're showing today with all of you afterwards. Today, you'll learn about the Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance and how it works. We'll present 3 case studies from past instruments, and we'll then answer your questions. If you have any questions, type it on the Q&A feature on Zoom. You'll find the icon on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. Our goal is to answer all your questions, but given that time is limited, do reach out via email for anything we can get to today. And with that, I turn it over to Ben Brochet, who managed the Global Labs program. Hello, Ben, take it away.
Thanks so much, Julio, and hello, everyone. It's great to see everyone on the line today, and thanks again for your interest in the lab program. We really look forward to helping you today to improve and target your submissions, which will ultimately make all of our lives easier and help to ensure that this cycle is as impactful as possible. For those of you who aren't familiar with Climate Policy Initiative, or CPI, the lab is one of our programs, and CPI serves as the secretariat for the lab. CPI's mission is to help governments, businesses, and financial institutions drive growth while addressing climate change. We're a global institution, and we have offices in Brazil, India, Indonesia, Kenya, the UK, and the US. So let's go ahead and get started with today's agenda. We'll start by explaining how the lab works and how the lab helps to develop climate finance instruments from idea to pilot, and in certain cases, ultimately to scale as well. Then my colleague Carla Orrego will walk you through 3 case studies on recent lab instruments, showing how they developed under the lab program and highlighting the lab's role in that. After that, I'll go through the selection process and specifically what the lab is looking for in submitted ideas. And following the presentations, we'll invite all of you to ask questions, and hopefully we can address all of those. And if we don't get to everything via the webinar, we're happy to answer questions via email afterwards. On that note, you can go ahead and start typing your questions into the Q&A box now or at any point during the presentation, and then we'll answer them after the initial presentation during the Q&A period. So with that, let me just start by introducing the lab program. So clearly, scaling up and mainstreaming climate investment across the board is going to be a crucial step on the pathway to 1.5 degrees. I just returned from a very busy COP26 last week, and we heard just so much of this about how critical it is to truly transform the way investors are viewing climate change and the role it plays in their portfolios, and just how crucial it is, especially in emerging economies, to really go from where we're at right now to a sea change in climate investing in order to meet global climate goals. So these are the latest numbers we see up on the screen from CPI's Landscape of Climate Finance, which is another project that we lead. You can see that climate finance flows reached just over $630 billion on average in 2019 and 2020, which is the highest amount we've seen so far, which is good news that public and private actors have steadily been increasing their investment commitments over the past decade. But unfortunately, that growth rate has actually declined over the past couple of years, where we saw 25 or more % growth, annual growth in prior years. This has slowed to only around 10% growth in 2019 and 2020. And given the incredible needs in the space, this is a pretty worrisome trend. So definitely some mixed news there. But the big picture here is, even with those increases, we're still so far behind what's needed for a successful low carbon transition. There's just a huge gap between the money that's going into climate projects. This is based on data from IEA and IRENA, BNF, and the Global Commission on Adaptation and some others. And based on these numbers, CPI estimates that there needs to be at least $4.3 trillion annually committed to climate finance across the board by 2030. So it's very clear that the incremental increases that we're seeing right now will be totally insufficient for what we need for a successful transition, and this will ultimately have disastrous results if the trends that we're seeing now continue into the future. We really need trillions in climate investment, and we need it right now. These numbers may seem quite large, but when you take a look at the capital that's being deployed across the global economy and in non-green energy and transportation and construction and other key sectors, it's pretty clear that the availability or the volume of capital is not the issue at all, but the fact that climate-friendly investment still really pales in comparison to the funding that's pouring into high carbon industries. And sadly, this is especially true in emerging economies. Some of the things that are hampering emerging market climate finance are a lack of investor familiarity, perceived risk within projects or investment vehicles, a lack of access to capital at the project or country level, and crucially for our purposes, the misalignment of existing financial instruments and available capital with on-the-ground needs. So on that point, the lab is stepping in to hopefully make some real concrete progress in addressing the investment gap. So we were launched in 2014 as this coalition of public development finance and private investors playing a role in bridging this gap by identifying the best ideas to unlock emerging market climate investment, building these ideas into bankable financial instruments, and then supporting their pathway to market. So far, we've launched 55 different instruments that have included funds, facilities, bonds, insurance and credit products, pay as you save or pay for success mechanisms, or other servitization type mechanisms, and more. All of these really, despite the fact that they're quite disparate in terms of financial structures, they all represent a common vision, which is how can we leverage the very limited public or concessional capital effectively through blended finance and other innovative finance structures to unlock private investment at scale. And on the next slide, there's just a snapshot of our network. We really rely on this network of more than 70 governments, development banks, philanthropies, and private investors who really actively contribute to the development of each year's selected ideas, and in many cases are investing capital directly alongside their time. So far, the lab programs have mobilized just over $3.2 billion US dollars with finance from our membership, unlocking significant co-investment, including critically over $1 billion from commercial banks and institutional investors, which are the very sources of capital that we desperately need to be coming in more to emerging market climate projects. So let me just illustrate in a bit more detail how the lab works. Firstly, we have an annual open call for innovative investment solutions that's open now. This has brought in hundreds of ideas, actually thousands over the past 6 years for a very diverse group of proponents. For this year, the call will stay open until December 22nd, so please keep that date on your calendar. So who are the successful proponents in the lab? This is a question that comes up in conversations and always on webinars like this one. Really, there is no one profile. Successful proponents have included startups, entrepreneurs, boutique fund managers, very large institutions from the public and private sectors, academic institutions, as well as global nonprofits and NGOs, alongside probably other entities that I'm not mentioning. The lab's call is really open to all innovators, and at this point, after the past 7 years of work and developing our network, we've learned a lot about how to work effectively with all types of institutions and ultimately support the progress of their instrument to market. So just to say that likely includes many, if not all of you on the line as potential proponents this year. Once the call concludes in December, CPI then screens submissions against an established set of criteria to determine the initial eligibility. And then through our network in a series of voting rounds and meetings, we refine the most promising ideas. Those ultimately will lead to a final global selection meeting for all of the finalists across the thematic streams and regions. This year, we're still not sure if this is going to be held in person or remote. If it is in person, there will certainly be a hybrid element to it as well. But this will happen towards the end of February. Then the selected ideas move into the development stage. And at this point, the Secretariat, lab members, and working groups comprised of other experts then partner with the selected ideas over several months to develop these into bankable financial solutions. Once the analytical phase is concluded, lab members then vote to endorse the final instruments, which signal their basically their readiness for launch and the lab members' full support. The focus then moves into what we call our continued support or go-to-market support phase, which my colleague Carla will talk a little bit more about. Too early, need some more coffee. This phase is focused on fundraising to launch pilots with support from the lab's network. The Secretariat basically provides an additional year in this phase of targeted support, analysis, and investor matchmaking to help ensure that the endorsed instruments get off the ground. So that's our process. There's a lot more information on our website, including detailed guidelines and an FAQ. And I think, Julio, you're going to post those links into the chat right now. So yeah, at this point, I'll just turn it over to you, Carla, who is our manager of continued support, to go over some specific case studies of ideas that the lab has helped develop to hopefully articulate in a little bit more detail how we work and some great examples of lab instruments. Thanks, Carla.
Thanks, Ben. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name, as Ben mentioned, is Carla Rego, and I'm going to briefly describe 3 cases of instruments selected in the past 3 cycles, so you can have a better sense of which type of ideas we're looking for. So next slide. The first instrument is PIREC Aggregation Fund. This is a revolving fund aiming to monetize the unbundled environmental attributes of renewable energy to provide project developers with an additional revenue stream. PIRECs stands for Peace Renewable Certificates, which are a type of high-quality international renewable energy certificate, thanks to the economic and social impacts that renewable energy projects deliver to communities in fragile contexts. And this is in addition to the environmental benefits produced by the renewable energy projects. The fund aims to tap into the growing market for energy certificates, which are especially popular among international corporations. So for instance, the proponents, Energy Peace Partners, already issue PIRECs from 2 renewable energy projects in DRC and sold them to Microsoft and Google. So how does this work? The fund works with project developers to provide upfront PIREC revenue equivalent to approximately 10% of the project construction costs in exchange for the PIRECs generated by the project. The transaction is based on a forward purchase commercial agreement between the fund and the project developer prior to initiating the construction process. Once the construction is finalized, the fund can apply directly for certification and have the PIRECs issued as energy is generated. Certified PIRECs are then aggregated at the fund level and traded on voluntary markets. So the aggregation function of the fund allows for cross-funding of various projects and operational flexibility. This is an instrument from the recent 2021 cycle, and it was selected because it's highly innovative and catalytic features. First, the fund addresses some of the major barriers to investment in renewables in fragile countries. Second, the fund is domiciled in stable jurisdictions, and the use of RECs as the underlying security minimize the political and currency risk. And third, it gives a provision to project developers of a commercial agreement with a guaranteed payment, which in turn helps to de-risk the construction finance for additional lenders. The PREC fund can provide a strong catalytic potential by unlocking between 9 and 19 times more capital from other sources and enabling generally small and medium-sized locally based developers to bring their renewable projects to life. By catalyzing investments, $1 invested can help avoid 15.5 tons of CO2 equivalent and provide energy access to about 32 households. Also, the delivery of energy infrastructure has the potential to improve the quality of life of communities in surrounding areas and foster economic growth. Renewable energy plants working with the fund could generate more than 800,000 megawatts per hour over 13 years, providing energy access to about 325,000 households and creating more than 2,000 jobs. So now moving to the next instruments, we have climate adaptation notes, which is a solution aiming to address water scarcity in Southern Africa by streamlining project financing for water and wastewater infrastructure. South Africa is one of the world's most water-stressed regions, but public funding for the repair, replacement, and development of infrastructure is limited. So in that way, CAN combines short-term project financing for construction from commercial banks and long-term asset-based infrastructure funding from institutional investors. What this means is that it combines the construction financing and refinancing phases of climate adaptation projects into a single bond, which is then administered through a debt capital markets platform. The platform will also have the capacity to manage the performance monitoring of project metrics. The instrument is looking to tap into the abundant private capital available in local debt capital markets and is designed to catalyze and increase capital flows and lower financing costs for this type of projects. CAN was endorsed in 2020 and it was selected for its innovative approach to address water scarcity and potential to increase the pipeline of bankable projects. It brings together commercial banks and institutional investors to develop a viable structure that overcomes barriers for investing in climate-related water risks. Also, the instrument seeks to allocate technical and credit risks to the financial actors best equipped to manage each particular type of risk during the process. So the first pilot will fund projects that reduce the severity of water shortages by improving infrastructure against extreme weather events and enhance efficiency to expand sustainable water supply per capita. It is projected that the initial implementation would increase water and wastewater treatment capacity by approximately 90 megaliters per day, reaching an additional 90,000 municipal residents. Moreover, this could also yield additional resilience outcomes, including a decline in the frequency of days or weeks with water use restrictions, a decline in household flooded during extreme storm events, and an increase in the number of households with climate-resilient food supply. So finally, moving to our last case, we have the Restoration Insurance Company, also known as Risco. And this is the first of its kind social enterprise that overcomes existing barriers to mangrove protection by connecting the adaptation and mitigation benefits of mangrove to the beneficiaries of these values. In most cases, these beneficiaries do not have the knowledge or resources needed to protect mangroves. So what Risco does is to conserve and restore mangrove ecosystems in emerging economies with high exposure to storms and flooding. and with people and assets located close to the coastlines. It will invest in conservation and restoration in areas where mangroves can provide property damage reduction benefits and generate blue carbon. In that way, Risco will generate revenues based on insurance savings from mangrove risk reduction benefits and the sale of blue carbon credits, overcoming the typical financing barriers for these activities. This instrument from the 2019 cycle stood out because of its bold theory of change. Risco is the first company to monetize risk reduction and blue carbon benefits of mangroves and to advance the insurance industry's ability to incorporate mangroves in their risk models. Also, it is a very replicable mechanism that can be implemented in many countries. So for instance, if applied on the top 10 most promising countries, it is expected to generate about half a billion in revenue over a 10-year period. Risco has the potential for significant impact related to reduced and avoided emissions and coastal protections. In terms of mitigation, over 10 years, the pilot will provide avoided emissions and sequestration of more than 630,000 tons of CO2, which is equivalent of the annual electricity use of nearly 100,000 homes. It will also provide important climate resilience benefits, such as flood risk reduction and livelihood benefits for local communities, and particularly women who account for the majority of users of mangrove-related resources. So just to close this section, I hope this overview gave you a sense of the types of ideas we're looking for. These cases illustrate how different instruments address a climate-related issue in a specific sector, targeting several SDG goals that could help achieve great impact on the ground. That said, all instruments that have gone through our program fit with the lab for defining criteria: innovation, financial sustainability, catalytic potential, and actionability. And now Ben is going to explain the lab selection process, including these 4 defining criteria in more detail. So over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Carla. Those are some really helpful case studies and great examples of some of the lab instruments. So yeah, just to delve into the criteria a bit more, this is also an area of questions that often come up. So lab ideas are selected based on 4 key criteria. The first one is actionability. So ideas should identify entities able to implement the ideas, the idea and ultimately in its pathway to market and scale up, including having a defined time frame, key activities and project milestones, and potential challenges and strategies for dealing with those challenges. One thing to really highlight here that may not be listed in the actual criteria is it's really important to underscore your team here. What is your team's track record? Why are you best positioned to be the proponent, the implementer of this idea? So that's something that the more you can bring that out in your submission, the better it is for us to assess the actionability of it and sort of get ahead of some potential barriers. So next is innovation. Lab ideas will demonstrate how the idea addresses barriers. Oh, hi. I have someone joining my webinar. My son. Yeah, so on innovation, this is basically either barriers that have not been addressed or making the point for how the instrument can address those more effectively than existing approaches in the market. Ultimately, this is about additionality and value add. Innovation, we think of this as more in terms of ensuring that this instrument is something that can really make a concrete impact, and that you've done a nice job articulating how financial innovation is the right lever to affect change with respect to emissions reduction or increasing resilience or unlocking investment, and how this tool in particular can play that role. So it's more about value add to the market than it is about creating something that is completely new. Third is catalytic potential. So this is the ability of the idea to mobilize private sources of finance, the potential for scale up at the target market and replication in other markets, and the ability to deliver clearly measurable socioeconomic development and climate impacts. So this is about the impact thesis. How well articulated is that? How measurable is that quantitatively and qualitatively, as well as the potential for growth and replication ultimately in different markets, and the potential for fairly quick and easy uptake by private investors. And lastly, just quite related to the catalytic potential is financial sustainability. So all of the lab ideas need to have a clear strategy for phasing out public and philanthropic financial support over time and achieving market viability on commercial terms, even if that runway is fairly long in certain cases. This is a really key tenet of the lab, is we are not interested in grant-only ideas, even if the goal of the idea is to more effectively use public funding. We ultimately want to see that funding unlocking commercial investment. And the reason behind this is just, as we went over a bit before, public funding is incredibly limited, including even concessional finance that's coming from the various DFIs, bilateral and multilateral development finance institutions around the world. This is a fraction of the total funding that is needed for emerging market climate projects in order to bring us to 1.5. So our goal is really to explore new mechanisms to use that very limited funding to leverage significant commercial capital and unlock that at scale. So having a clear pathway for financial sustainability is quite crucial in that regard. So just moving on to our focus areas before we go into the Q&A period. So the lab's looking for innovative finance solutions across a number of sectors that can unlock investment for net zero, a net zero resilient economic transition in emerging economies around the world. We'll develop 6 to 7 ideas in 2022 from 3 thematic streams and 3 regional programs, plus 1 what we call the wildcard slot, which is reserved for the best idea that doesn't fall into the previously established focus sectors or geographies. The point of this is just to maintain as much flexibility as possible, and while we've really seen the increase in the quality and the targeted nature of submissions as we've delineated between regions and sectors in each year's call for ideas. We've also seen that it's really important to have at least 1 slot made available for high quality ideas that may not fit within that. So even if you're not looking at these focus areas or regional programs this year, but you have a concept for a financial vehicle that can unlock investment in climate in developing countries, feel free to submit that. It will definitely be considered as long as it's eligible and fits the lab's 4 other criteria. It will be considered under the wildcard slot this year. But just to go through a little bit more detail on these themes. So this year we have a dedicated climate adaptation stream focused on innovative financial instruments that resolve market barriers and support the scale up of private finance for solutions that build resilience. Often climate adaptation, just given the broad impacts of adaptation and resilience focused approaches, can be cross-sectoral, and this could really span interventions that build physical climate resilience of assets, or improve the resilience of supply chains, and support systemic climate resilience. So looking at climate-related disaster risk and resilience, whether this be from weather events, sea level rise, urban climate resilience, all of these are on the table. And we're really looking forward to seeing a number of different approaches and ideas for unlocking investment in resilience under this particular window this year. The second one is sustainable food systems. So this is focused on ideas that support sustainable food systems overall, just underscoring the crucial role that food systems play in global emissions, as well as the need to create more climate resilience and food security ultimately, given the risks that food systems are facing from climate change. So this could include reducing food-related emissions or increasing the resilience in food systems. Either of those are fine. They could include solutions in farming, waste management, and input supply, as well as interacting systems like energy, trade, and health. Thirdly, we've just launched a brand new stream this year on zero carbon buildings. We're looking for ideas that generate climate benefits in the buildings and construction sector. These could include, but certainly aren't limited to, reduction in the carbon intensity of building materials, the use of sustainable local materials, improved heating or cooling. This is really crucial. Or even insulation design. So looking at the efficiency of buildings themselves, as well as the construction of new or retrofitted net zero buildings, especially public buildings and public housing, where we may see that intersection between climate benefits and socioeconomic benefits really strongly. And also just underscoring, especially given the pandemic and the need to create a sustainable green recovery, underscoring the job benefits there as well. Then finally, our 3 priority regions. This year, we are specifically looking at ideas targeting Brazil, India, and Southern Africa. So we have dedicated local panels that are screening and helping to select the ideas. So these are investors and other experts, lab member institutions that are dedicated solely to those regions, who help to provide local expertise in the screening of those. We're really looking for ideas that help to drive private finance into each of these countries, in the case of India and Brazil, and regions, in the case of Southern Africa, their national climate priorities and supporting channels for green growth there. We are looking across sectors here, mitigation, adaptation, energy, land use, transportation, urban infrastructure, the blue economy, basically everything that the lab has looked at in the past are fair game as long as they're focused on these regions. And then finally, as mentioned, the wildcard slot is for the best idea. So if you have an idea that is relevant but doesn't fit within any of these categories, please still submit it. We'll consider it under the final slide. So with that, that was a lot of information. Surely, I'm sure there are plenty of burning questions. We will go ahead and take those at this time. I see there's already a number of questions going into the Q&A tool, so I'll just pause for a brief second and confer with my colleagues, and we'll go ahead and get started.
We do have been a few questions already posted to the Q&A. So let me start with the first question. Does the idea always have to leverage private investment? The idea submitted to the lab, does it always have to leverage private investment? And does the idea always have to show a clear business plan, always generating revenue for private sector?
Generally, the answer to that would be yes. Once again, though, this doesn't have to be right out of the gate. Almost without exception, successful lab instruments have had an initial capital stack that is quite concessional, and the initial sources of capital are typically coming from donors. So hopefully that answers it. Yes, you should have a clear pathway to achieving returns for private investors at some point.
Okay, so question now from Muala Mutom. I run a startup which is less than 2 years. Do we qualify to apply?
Yes, that's fine. We have no limits in terms of how long an entity needs to be established before they're applying. In fact, in some cases, there's actually been new companies or entities that have been spun out of the lab process or have come in and have been brand new. Again, I would say it's really crucial to underscore the track record of your team. So what are your capabilities, even if it's a newly formed entity or a startup? What are your backgrounds? What is your network like? What is your experience in the space? Obviously, but completely fine to be applying as a startup.
Okay, let me turn now to Carla for the next question from Rodolfo Rodriguez. He asks if it's admissible to apply an idea from Colombia based in nature-based solutions.
Yes, the short answer is yes. So just to clarify, we have particular slots by region and by theme. It doesn't mean that the solution should be for that region and for the same theme. It could be just one of those. And then the wildcard slot is meant to be open, so it can fairly fit this solution from Colombia, focus on nature-based solutions.
Also related to the programs and streams from Rob, does the theme solution does the theme solution need to be in one of the 3 regions, especially for a pilot program ready for funding? But then the solution can be brought to these regions. He then ratified the theme solution pilot that would not be in one of these 3 regions. Not sure if I follow, but Carla.
Yes, I think if I'm following the question right, yes, the focus could be in any emerging market, so in any region, not only in the ones we have a defined slot. And then the idea of these solutions is to have some scalability and replicability potential. So the pilot doesn't necessarily have to be in these particular regions, but it could be replicated afterwards in any of these. So Ben, I don't know if you maybe want to comment on that.
Yeah, sure. You covered it, I think, Carla. If there is a clear applicability in, say, Brazil, India, Southern Africa, but there might be a focus outside of those areas, they'll still be considered under those regional programs. But again, as you said, we're not limited to those 3. So we have 3 other themes that don't fall into those regional categories. The food systems adaptation and buildings, as well as the wildcard slot. So it's fine even if there isn't a focus on those 3, but it doesn't have to be exclusive, basically. So you could have an idea that has pilot operations proposed in Brazil and Colombia and Peru, for instance, and that could still be considered under the Brazil program as long as there's kind of a clear initial focus and benefit there. Whereas if your initial, and I would say this, since we've definitely received a lot of submissions over the years, sometimes ones that are pretty high quality, where it's very clear that the focus isn't on any of the regions that we prioritize, but the proponents have sort of just slotted that in as like, well, this could be replicated in Brazil 5 years later. That's probably not going to be considered under the regional programs, and it isn't really going to improve the chances of your idea being selected if you just kind of select that idea as a focus area. But it's clear, really your operations are, say, in East Africa or in Southeast Asia. Be as transparent as possible. If if you have a strong network or plans to be moving into one of the focus areas, even if your existing operations are in a different region, totally fine, will still be considered. But yeah, that's often a question that comes up. I know we had a number of other questions related to the Southern Africa program, so whether it has to cover all of the SADC countries. It does not. It could be for one country in the SADC region. It could cover all of them. It could cover a couple of them. That's fine. There were a couple of questions about other geographies in sub-Saharan Africa, whether those would count under the Southern Africa stream. For Southern Africa in particular, we are just looking at the 14 SADC countries. However, sub-Saharan Africa has been a huge and continues to be a big region of focus for us. So just looking at the portfolio last year, 2 out of the 6 instruments were focused on West Africa, and we did not have a West Africa stream last year. So they were ideas that were selected under other thematic categories. Certainly West and East Africa remain very high priority regions for the lab and for our network. So feel free to submit those. And the same would go, say, for other economies in Latin America, outside of Brazil.
Next question, if a business model already exists in Germany, for example, and focuses on acting in other emerging economies, emerging countries like Brazil or not Brazil, would the replication of this business model for the scenario of Brazil be considered an innovation, specifically targeting the call for ideas, the lab's call for ideas?
Sure. So we have instruments that have applied in the past with a replication idea. And as long as the idea fits with our 4 defining criteria and is adapted to the new geography and the new context, yeah, it can definitely be considered. So one thing to keep in mind is that most of these solutions, when applied to a specific geography, can be applied in the same way to a different one. So there should be the proper adaptation on that end. But again, as long as it fits our 4 defining criteria and we see that there's a lot of potential, then that's totally fine.
Next question coming from Raul Fretes. Is it applicable to apply with an idea that's not yet in the implementation phase, nor as of today as a prototype developed?
Yes, absolutely. That's fine, as long as just keeping in mind that we're looking for financial innovations, not technology innovations.
Coming next from Diego Vasquez. So he says he's from a startup focused on decarbonization solutions applicable to the traditional carbon-intensive energy market. Their idea is focused on a particular sector and associated with funding mechanisms. So he asks, we have not yet identified a pilot. Should we apply this year? Hello?
Yes, so yeah, this is something we have seen in the past. The pilot hasn't been identified, but the region has. So one of the things we have come with is to develop a target market framework to identify the best place to start the pilot and the operations. So yeah, this can definitely be an option as well.
Let me ask you to clarify, Carla, one of the questions here. We will be selected only 6 to 7 ideas worldwide, or 6, 7 by region?
Worldwide. Oh, sorry, Ben, go ahead.
No problem. I was just saying that's 6 to 7 total across the whole portfolio worldwide.
All right. Is there a minimum and maximum funding applicants should be considering?
No. The fundraising of the instruments could could vary or could be in any part of the spectrum. So yeah, we don't have any minimums or maximums.
Great. And what kind of documents should be signed by potential implementers of the solution to give more concreteness to the idea, cooperation agreements?
Sorry, Julia.
Yeah, sure. One question is about what kind of documents should be signed by potential implementers of this solution to give more concreteness to the idea. Any cooperation agreement?
Yeah, maybe I can come in here. I don't think that we don't have a set need for cooperation agreements. Again, just be transparent. If you're in initial conversations with some partners, just note that those conversations are emerging. If you have signed MOUs or JD arrangements with certain implementation partners, then note that in your submission. It's just important for us to know kind of where things are at. We've had a number of quite successful proponents that have just been in initial discussions with potential implementation partners, and through the lab process, those have moved into being a bit more concrete. But yeah, just tell us where things are at, but we don't require any specific arrangement in order to apply.
Next question is coming from Peter Hamilton. So what about if the proposed financial instrument is so new that financial regulations are still not well developed yet globally?
That would, again, it's difficult to say definitively without seeing what the proposal is, but that would potentially impact the score on the actionability front. So because we're looking at investment vehicles that can be implemented now under the current regulatory environment, just given the scope of the lab support, as much as there's obviously a vital role for regulatory change throughout the world in many cases, and the crucial role that policy levers play in driving climate finance, that's less our focus within the lab. So if this relies on regulation that's sort of already in process, then that might be suitable, but we're generally not looking at things that may be years down the road and rely on regulatory change.
So for the next one, I'm combining two questions also related to program and stream. So Christelle DeBell asks, could you please clarify whether all projects must fit the 3 countries in focus? Would the project in Indonesia be acceptable if it was to fit one or more of the themes? And I'll combine it with another one. How are the chances for Latin America, specifically Mexico, to be selected? Is this call for us?
Yes, again, so to answer the first one, it doesn't need to fit the 3-country focus. The project can have an initial focus in Indonesia, and that's acceptable. And ideally, it can fit one of the thematic streams, but also that's not necessary. We have the slot for the wildcard, in which this is fairly open, and it could be for any region or theme as well. And for the following question, yes, also a solution focus in Mexico is acceptable. We do have many LATAM instruments focused in different countries of the regions. The year before, we have an instrument exclusively dedicated to Mexico, monetizing water savings. So it could also be a good submission for this year.
Thanks, Carla. Next question from Anthony Dane. Do you exclude any organizations based on current positions in fossil fuels? For example, I'm part of a startup that includes a contract coal miner, but I see this is critical to driving a concrete just transition solution in the coal mining region in South Africa.
I think we would have to see this submission to know a little bit more. When it comes to the ideas that we're looking for to support in the energy space, all of them are going to fall into the renewables space. In some case, we have done a little bit in biogas, agricultural biogas in Brazil. Even that, I would say, was a bit of a new area for us, a bit of a push. Everything else has been in solar PV, with some finalists that have been in the wind space as well. So just to note, I mean, that is what we're focused on within the program. But again, it's tough to say eligibility without actually seeing what that fits in with, you know, in terms of a just transition idea that was focused on coal phase down. You know, I think that would need to be, we'd have to see that. I have a feeling that probably wouldn't be eligible for clear reasons.
Next, from Luca Coutro, correlation between theme and regional focus is required or advised?
Good question. I would say it's definitely not required, and it's not even necessary. You could have a regional idea that doesn't fit at all with one of the three defined criteria. You could have a Southern Africa idea that is focused on nature-based solutions that has nothing to do with food systems, so it wouldn't fit within any of the other ones that is mitigation focused, say. So not adaptation, not food systems, or, you know, energy access, for instance. But that would be eligible because it's regional focus. But if there is correlation between the established themes and regions, that's really great to note as well, because it could be considered under both streams, but ultimately not required and may not impact the chances of selection.
Okay, so we have still 5 minutes to go and a few
Yep.
questions. I think there's time. So can previous finalists resubmit the same proposal, which is at a more advanced stage? Carla,
do you want to take this one?
Sorry, yes, sorry, Julio, can you repeat?
Yeah, sure. Can previous finalists resubmit the same proposal, which is at a more advanced stage?
Yes, we had those cases in the past, and as long as you can show material improvements or some advances towards implementation of the idea, and basically highlight what is different this time, yeah, we have selected, for instance, in this past cycle, reapplicants from previous cycles.
Okay, so next question also from Walamoto. She asks, is there any co-financing requirement from the applicant?
No. No, there is not.
Okay, next one. Will the lab support any financial mechanism as long as it's leveraged private capital, for example, guarantees?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've had a number of successful instruments that have either been guarantees themselves or have leveraged guarantees. So yes, definitely. And the second one, do members of the lab offer mentorship or support to scale up if needed after the idea is selected? Absolutely. That's a really key aspect of what the lab is. So you'll have support and mentorship from usually 10 or 15 lab member institutions that will extend throughout the whole process.
Next question, is it possible to hear from previous acceleratees or lab proponents to understand their experience and where they have got since their instrument or project was launched? We have a lot of these stories, right?
Yes, we actually have on our website some reports about lessons learned and success cases. Also, all the past projects are listed, so you're free to reach out to any of them to know a little bit more about the experience. And they have also links to their website, so you can see what has the implementation been so far.
It's an important question here. Coming next, is there project support granted to the organization during the development phase of the idea in terms of supporting salary costs of members of the organization?
Sadly, no, at this stage. We would love to be able to do that or have working capital included in the lab, but at this point, it's just technical support, which is, I think, valued at around $250,000 US in CPI time, and then as well a huge amount of pro bono support, be it legal support and technical and financial support from the investors and experts in the lab network that make up the working groups on top of that. As well as access to the network and a really great track record of instruments raising funds through that. I think at this point, almost 60% of endorsed lab instruments have made it. They've done quite well and have mobilized capital quite soon after graduating from the lab process. So this is something we'd love to be able to answer, but to address, but unfortunately, we're not at this point.
I don't think we really can answer the next one. Could you suggest a mechanism that supports policy development? So many options.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, can we suggest a mechanism? I'm assuming that maybe you're asking perhaps another instrument or another accelerator or initiative that is focused on policy development. There are plenty, but they would vary a ton depending on region and sector. So that's a tough one to answer. Maybe we can take that one offline. And the last one, it's a great question. Why are the number of selected ideas per year so low? It's a few things. This is just what we're able to do this year based on the funding that we have from our various partners. So that varies each year, as well as the different themes. Secondly, the lab process is a huge amount of time on our end and effort from the lab network. So it would be quite difficult if we were doing a ton of ideas each year. There are a lot of other accelerator type programs that are functioning more like prizes that don't have the significant amount of human effort that go into developing and launching these things over 2 years. And those may offer a wider number each year, but the support is significantly less. So it's kind of all we're able to do at this point. Yes, it is a highly competitive program. That is not, we receive, and the question that just came through, we tend to receive somewhere between 150 and 250 submissions each year. With that in mind, a fair number of those are not financial instruments. So if you are submitting with an instrument that meets the lab criteria, that number is quite a bit smaller. And for the most part, those will go before the lab membership, and they'll ultimately make the final decisions in terms of which ones go forward and which ones don't.
Very, very last one. How many applications do we receive each year?
I think I just spoke to that one. Sort of answered 2 in 1.
Great.
Yeah.
So I think that's it then.
Great. Well, thanks so much, everyone. Again, we'll be in touch with a recording of the webinar and an email. I think, Julia, are you gonna just close it out with the poll at this point?
Yes. But just if you want to stay in touch with us, consider subscribe to the lab newsletter. Sorry about the typo. but I see that many of you are already subscribers. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks so much. Have a good day. Look forward to seeing your submissions.